Fantastic. So my name is Sanjay Nanwani, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Society. It's a pleasure to be presenting at the Society for Qualitative Inquiry in Psychology at this roundtable on social justice, in this international roundtable and very much a Latin American panel with Everardo Manjarrez, with Susana del Mar Frisancho, and with Alicia Barreiro. So, besides holding a doctorate in education from the Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, in Bogotá, Colombia, and a pre-doctoral research fellowship at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and currently teaching at the Universidad Externado de Colombia, on a more human level, I was born in Casablanca, Morocco, to Indian parents who had to flee when India acquired its independence and the partition took place. My parents lived in an area that was going to be part of Pakistan. They were Hindu, and they essentially had to flee to other parts of India. And after that, they emigrated to Morocco, which is where my brothers, my sister, and I were born. And when I was 1 year old, my family transferred to Barcelona, Spain. In Spain, in Barcelona, I attended a British school. I did my primary and secondary schooling in Barcelona. But my home was very much Indian. Why am I saying this to you? Well, I'm saying this to you because exposure to different cultures at a young age led me to confusion, led me to being exposed to different discourses, to different interpersonal interactions in different cultures, different ways even of communicating in different cultures, and different value sets and ways of understanding, for example, how democracy, how equality, how human dignity, not only politically, but also in our daily interactions, was advanced or was not advanced. And this really formed the basis of my research interest as an adult. My research lines are educational climate, classroom climate, school climate, and climate in universities and higher education institutions. Another one of my research lines is education for and in democracy, citizenship development, and teacher development. What I'm going to be talking to you today about is an ethnographic multi-case study based on thematic analysis that I conducted in Cali, Colombia. Cali is one of the main cities in Colombia, and like Colombia, has had a history of violence. It's very diverse ethnically. And what I did in Cali is conduct qualitative research by going into public schools in marginalized neighborhoods of the city. When I say marginalized, I'm talking about poverty, sometimes, I don't know if extreme poverty, but certainly acute poverty. And the student composition in the schools that I went into was Afro-descendant, partly, and was composed by students who came from families who had been displaced as a result of the armed conflict that has lasted for over 5 decades in Colombia. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about marginal or marginalized contexts. I'm not going to read these questions, but these were the research questions that guided the qualitative study that I carried out. And essentially what I wanted to do is to make sense of teachers' conceptions regarding different elements, or what I considered were different elements, inherent to democratic citizenship education, their conceptions, but also their practices. So what they thought and what they said about democratic citizenship development, and for example, what they said and how they thought regarding student participation, regarding equality of respect and recognition in the classroom, regarding equality of power or more horizontal relations in the classroom, but also what they did and what they didn't do. So these research questions allowed me to not only make sense of their conceptions and practices, but also to understand and define and determine if these conceptions and practices were aligned. So, in essence, if they practiced what they preached, so to speak. I'm going to be referring to some of the challenges that emerge when conducting qualitative research in a context like the contexts of schools, public schools in Cali. The idea that contexts are unique and dynamic, and case studies serve to investigate and report the complex dynamic and unfolding interactions of events, human relationships, and other factors in a unique instance, is not only complicated, but it is complex. So what we're trying to do through qualitative research, or at least what I was trying to do, is to make sense of how human beings thought and what human beings did and why they did what they did, and if what they did was aligned to what they said they thought. Yes. So in essence, my study was about the reported practices of teachers, but also the actual practices of teachers, and also what they thought about different elements of democratic citizenship education. The study was centered on democratic citizenship education, and democratic citizenship education, at least how I understood it and how I understand it, is a complex enterprise in itself, because it's not limited to knowledge acquisition but also to value formation. It integrates the development of democratic skills but also democratic dispositions. Now, how do you actually identify democratic dispositions through qualitative research? That's a question I put on the table. Democratic citizenship education is not so much formally learned, but actually cultivated in action through daily interactions. And so one of the challenges that emerges in qualitative research is whether qualitative research methods are able to tap into concrete actions in daily interactions that lead or that advance democratic citizenship development, or that, on the contrary, do not advance it. So in essence, what we're trying to do, or what I was trying to do through this study, was to make sense of how democratic classroom climates were. And sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were, authoritarian regimes. Another challenge that emerges in conducting qualitative research is accounting for one's own biases. It's accounting for the uniqueness of contexts and for the uniqueness of the range of participants that comprise these contexts. From a very practical standpoint, in a country like Colombia, there are limited funds to conduct research. Another challenge is the idea of safety. How safe is it to go into contexts or neighborhoods that are referred to as barrios calientes in Spanish? That translated in English, that means hot neighborhoods, and hot has the connotation of dangerous neighborhoods. Yeah, so that's another challenge. Then there are challenges regarding methodological issues, being able to select the instruments that will actually allow one, as the researcher, to attain, or to respond rather, to the research questions formulated. And when these instruments do not necessarily exist or are not necessarily adapted to a particular context, the challenge of designing these the data collection instruments. In my case, one of the instruments that I had to design was an observation matrix. And the way that this observation matrix was designed was through being informed by the instruments that already existed. So one of the instruments that I was informed was the Democratic Climate of Civic Education Classroom Scale, which was designed by a researcher in Indonesia to measure the democratic climate of civic education classrooms, and also by another instrument called CLASS, which stands for Classroom Assessment Scoring System, designed by Robert Pianta and his team at the University of Virginia. And when I was designing my own observation matrix, for example, I had to come up with my own dimensions. I had to come up with my own indicators that were aligned to these dimensions, and also to the behavioral markers that would allow me to identify what teachers were actually doing in their respective classrooms. Along those lines, one of the elements that I wanted to make sense of is whether teachers promoted equality of respect and recognition. If, for example, they favored the voice of boys over the voice of girls. If, for example, they were respectful insofar as they, wouldn't shout to the students. At the end of the day, when we talk of respect, respect is something that they speak of in the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, in the Dharavi slums of Bombay, in suburbs in the US, and certainly in Cali, Colombia. But respect is also cultural. So what respect is or what respect was, to go back to my own life trajectory, in my home when I was a child, and what respect was in the British school that I attended, or what respect was in the fascist Spain of the Franco regime, was distinct from purely a cultural standpoint. Another challenge was the range of discourses that one is exposed to when one is conducting his study. And these discourses are sometimes or relate to how the different participants in the study, in my case, fifth grade teachers, positioned themselves. So for one of the participants in my study, he positioned himself as the pastor, as he would call it, of his students. And his discourse was very much evangelical. And so at one point, I asked him in an interview how, what he felt about imparting or having in the radar sexual education. Even though we're talking about fifth graders are pre-adolescents, or will be in the adolescent stage in 2 years or so. And so when I tried to make sense of his heteronormative discourse and his evangelical discourse, I formulated a question, and his reply, I'm going to translate this, was, no, God made man, a man with a woman and a woman with a man, and if we are believers, we cannot think of a man with a man or a woman with a woman. No, we shouldn't. We can't. The learner, when he is an adult, this is what he meant, will take his own decisions. But while we can form men with women and women with men, and put these principles that God left in the Ten Commandments, then for me that is the best. So this kind of discourse, I think, speaks for itself. I don't think I'm going to extend myself here, but perhaps formulate the question of what are teachers actually doing? Are they actually developing critical thinking? Are they actually indoctrinating based on their own religious belief systems, etc.? And lastly, I would like to share with you this other excerpt that came up in my study. And this came up as a result of me, in a classroom observation, seeing how a little girl asks her teacher if she can go to the loo. And the teacher's response to her, "My love, I don't control your bladder." And so when I asked her what she meant by "my love, I don't control your bladder," this was her response. It's that I think that this is a part of democracy, and I'm inclined to believe that it is part of critical thinking. I think that in a society, that in a school environment where I have to ask for permission to go to the loo, and where I have to tell an adult who is there as an authority figure having to ask for permission to urinate, for me to go to defecate, to expel what is inside my organism that at that point is asphyxiating me when my bladder is full, the intestine, I find it humiliating. She later on goes on to explain that when a boy or a girl asks her whether he or she can go to the loo, this is what she says: "It takes me back to a film I saw called Maids and Ladies at the time when in the United States, the black ladies that worked in the House of the White, so the lady would measure the toilet paper they gave to the maid and would even make them have an independent sanitary place or a washroom outside." So I felt that that was so humiliating, and so I always take that with me to the classroom. That I should have to ask for permission so that you can go to the loo, I feel is humiliating. So anyway, the challenge when conducting qualitative research is the range of discourses that one is exposed to, the range of cosmovisions that one is exposed to, the range of belief systems that one is exposed to. And I think that at the end of the day, yet another challenge emerges once the study is completed. How do we, as researchers, make use of the research that we conduct in order to develop, in order to promote a particular culture, in this case a democratic culture based on my own biases, in the classroom setting? At the end of the day, the fundamental questions that emerge are: how do we, from a school setting, develop democratic citizens? Do we do this by telling them what democracy is, by what a democratic institution is, or do we actually practice democracy so that fifth graders and sixth graders and seventh graders, etc., actually cultivate a democratic mindset and are actually practicing respect in their daily interactions, irrespective of your sexual orientation, irrespective of your ethnicity, irrespective of your gender, etc., etc. And finally, I would like to end my presentation by saying that despite the challenges of conducting qualitative research, that there is beauty in qualitative research. That at the end of the day, qualitative research methodologies allow us to at least try to make sense of how different actors, in this case teachers, whom I believe are in the front line of reconstructing the social fabric in a context like the Colombian, think, and not only think, but what they do. So that would be my contribution to this panel. Thank you very, very, very much